Hey guys, how's it going? It's Baggins here, and today I wanted to do an updated sort of build guide video for the current armor, weapons, jewelry, gems, skill mastery, attributes, the full shebang for what I'm using for healing mutated expeditions in New World. So if you're going into mutated Lazarus, mutated the Depths, mutated Tempest, what am I currently using to heal that dungeon? And if we have any build changes or any specific recommendations, we'll talk about it within that relevant segment as well. So in order to make this video easier to navigate, I'm going to put timestamps in the description down below, but that also means you can drag along in the video and find any particular sets that you're interested in. So obviously we'll probably label them as dungeons, so they'll be like, this is my set for Tempest Heart, or we'll just put Tempest Heart in the description and then we'll put Lazarus, but it will be respective. Like Tempest Heart is your corrupted ward set, Lazarus is your ancient ward set, and so on and so forth. So yeah, scrub along the video to find the different sets that you're interested in. Before we do go any further, I do want to address one particular topic, and that is gems in the armor, and also just the overall concept of do you need ward gear as well? Because what you're going to find as I switch between my different sets, what differentiates one set from the another is the presence of the ward. So you can see this has got Ancient Ward here, and this has Angry Earth Ward. So Angry Earth Ward we use for Genesis, Ancient Ward we use for quite a few different dungeons, and again we'll talk about that later on. But the question is that necessary? Do you need the ward gear? And for me, the answer is no, you don't need it. In fact, we did a video, and I'll link it up in the top right, where we healed a Lazarus run with no ward gear. I was just using my PvP armor, and I also had no constitution as well. So you don't need it, but I would recommend it. It's like what I usually say to Twitch chat is somebody would say, do I need clean drinking water and some food rations and a knife to be able to survive in the jungle or in the wilderness for, a week straight? I would say you don't need it. You could go in naked with no resources, no preparation at all, but man, it would help if you had those supplies. It really would help if you went in ahead of time. It give you a better chance of success, and it's the same with ward gear. You don't need it, but it is highly recommended. And indeed, one thing that you're going to find when you go to sign up for any groups, if you're not playing with a bunch of friends that you're usually going to find people saying link all. You need to link your items to them, and what that means is when you apply, you would then need to send a message to the leader here, direct message, and what I would do is I would go through my armor and I would actually link it to him like this, and then you can see down here it's being sent in a DM. And then he can mouse over it and see what I've got. And obviously they will be looking for the ward gear, and maybe they'll be looking for the gems as well, which is another thing that I want to touch on. I don't actually go in and use specific gems, other than the exception of these boots here, which have a void damage absorption. So this is ancient ward boots with the void damage, and I'm using these currently in Starstone Barrows because it is void. Typically, that's not something I do. What I do instead is I use opal gems, which provide 2.5 elemental damage absorption across the board. So 2.5 for fire, frost, nature, and void. And then where I get the bulk of my specific elemental damage absorption from is my amulets. So I have an amulet here that has frozen protection, so 10% ice damage absorption, and then another 6% here, so 16% on the amulet, obviously with health as well, pretty mandatory perk. And then we have the void equivalent of it here. We have a fire version and we have a nature version, and I just swap out my amulet and keep the opal gems the same. I find this saves me a lot of gold. It saves me a lot of headaches needing to constantly be changing gems all the time. For example, right now we have the Ennead with ice, but we also have Starstone Barrows with void. Both of these expeditions feature a lot of ancient enemies, so you'll need an ancient ward set to be able to complete them or to be able to take part in them. But it means that if you switch between one and the other, you're going to need to switch all of your aquamarine gems to amethyst gems for ice and void respectively. And then if you want to go back and do the Ennead later on, then you need to switch all your gems back to ice. And that's just such a pain in the butt. Or you could get two separate sets of ancient ward gear, but again, expensive and annoying to have so much different pieces of armor in your inventory. So what I do instead is I just go for opal gems as a nice coverall, and then I switch my amulet. So if I'm going into Starstone, we're using this one for the void, and then if I'm going to go into Ennead, we use this one for the ice. And there's also an added benefit with the opal gems that when it comes to fighting bosses, and we'll use Ennead again for an example here, The bosses don't actually respect the like icebound nature of the mutation. The bosses don't do ice damage, they just do their own damage that they would typically do. And in the case of the Ennead, a lot of the bosses do fire damage, and also I think the second boss, the corrupted guy, does a lot of void damage as well. So the opal gems are not only protecting you against ice with the 2.5% elemental, which is ice, but it's also 2.5% fire as well. Which again, it's just, you know, it's a nice coverall. It catches everything and it protects you against multiple different damage sources. So not only the mutation, but any sort of special elemental damage types that the bosses might do. Another example is in the depths, where it is typically fire, but the first priest, the guy who summons the dogs, he does a lot of void damage. So again, the elemental gems cover us against the void, but they also cover us against the fire for the mutation. So yeah, I like opal gems. We just switched to the amulet instead, but I just thought we'd talk about gems and ward gear real quick, because that is a pretty popular topic of discussion when it comes to mutations, and that's what works for me. Okay, so with gems and ward gear out of the way, let's step into our first mutation, which, you know, I think is a good one to get everybody started, and that is Lazarus Instrumentality. Now, right now, at the time of recording, this is not mutated, but I believe, especially by the time this video comes out, it will probably be mutated, and it'll probably have the fire mutation. So with that in mind, what would I use to heal a mutated Lazarus run with the fire mutation? And again, it seems at this point that Amazon are like basically on a set cycle where Lazarus will have fire, and it'll probably be Barnacles at the same time, and Barnacles will have ice, and then it switches over to Tempest, and I think Tempest has nature, and it's the depths, and the depths has fire. They seem to just be following a set pattern now. But yeah, Lazarus with fire, what are we using? Well, first of all, let's just go over the armor. So I'm using the Imbued Forgotten Protector Sallet of the Sage, which actually comes from mutated Lazarus, so this is like not going to be a super pristine example of like, oh yeah, just go do mutated Lazarus so that you can get your ancient ward gear to do mutated Lazarus. But this is what I use. I do like it when you can get ancient ward and elemental aversion. I'm yet to test it, but I have a sneaking suspicion that elemental aversion does help you take less damage from the actual mutation itself. You know, when the fire circles appear on the ground, or that green gloopy, you know, the nature puddle follows after you, I do think it helps reduce the damage from those. And then refreshing evasion or refreshing, both of those going to be pretty nice as well. My chest piece here comes from mutated Starstone Barrows. It's got ancient ward and refreshing, great. Invigorated comes in handy sometimes. The gloves, just like the helmet, also from mutated Lazarus, great set of perks here. Now this is where things get a little bit weird, and I talked about this earlier on in the video, I think. I don't change my legs in most mutations. In most dungeons that I do, my legs stay consistent, and they have Fortifying Sacred Ground, Refreshing, and Elemental Aversion, which are 3 really good perks. Fortifying Sacred Ground is like a must-have perk. You really, really want to have Fortifying Sacred Ground on a piece of armor. I think it's like almost mandatory. One thing that is kind of weird here, you guys might ask, is why have we got a Rune Glass gem in here? And honestly, this has just come when I was like playing around with a different build back in the past. I was trying to do as much nature damage as I can. If you want to see that video, put a link up in the top right. It was a weird one, but yeah, we put Rune Glass gems in my armor to try and see how much nature damage we do. It's still got the Malachite gem for elemental damage absorption, a little bit of physical, which isn't the worst thing as well. But yeah, great set of perks here, and I just keep this pretty much consistent across all my dungeons. And you know, I think it might be something that works for you guys as well. It's just one consistent piece of gear that you don't need to change that has 3 great perks on it. These are all obviously crafted. I can't remember whether I bought them or crafted them myself, but yeah, great legs there. And then the boots, just like with the helmet and the gloves, have, you know, they've got the 3 perks from mutated Lazarus as well. We got these to drop. These ones have freedom on, which I don't think freedom is actually really that useful in Lazarus. It can maybe help when the staff guy does the stomp and you get rooted to the ground. But generally, you know, this would be better as refreshing. Moving on to the amulet, again, because it is going to be a fire mutation, we're using flame protection with a ruby gem as well, so 16% fire damage absorption here. The ring, and I use this ring in almost all expeditions, is the Stone-hewn ring with Hearty Sacred, which is great. And the siphoning, not really that good, honestly. You could just drink a mana potion to get your mana back, but it's something, and it's available as a drop, again, from mutated Starstone Barrows. And then finally we have our earring here, which stays consistent across like pretty much all content I do. It's a crafted earring, and I love it. This is one of like my oldest pieces of gear that I have, and it's one of the few things that hasn't changed in about a year now. All my other gear I've updated, but this has stayed pretty consistent. The only thing that kind of lets it down is the diamond. because obviously we want to focus more on elemental for mutations, but a diamond's still not bad, you know, it covers physical. You are still going to take some physical damage in mutations, and it's got a little bit of elemental. Healthy Toast is a must-have perk in my opinion. Refreshing Toast also must-have, and then if you can get a third perk, I think Refreshing or Refreshing Evasion are great. Moving on to the weapons, I do like to use Dark Vengeance in particular when it comes to doing Mutated Lazarus, and that is because I like to get in there with the Void Blade. So we'll showcase the weapon mastery in a second. But Refreshing Move is great with the Void Blade because every time you land the swing with the blade, it like lowers all your cooldowns, so you can just keep spamming Oblivion and Orb of Decay or whatever abilities you want to use. Lifestealing also going to help you stay in the fight. If you pop this while you're in Sacred Ground, it increases the healing of lifestealing, and then there's some natural lifesteal that's on the Void Gauntlet as well. So yeah, I do like Dark Vengeance, but honestly, a Blessed Refreshing Move, or just like Blessed plus anything, is going to be good enough to sort of get you through the early mutations, and even into later Lazarus, it's not that difficult. Life Staff that I use here is a crafted Life Staff with Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Mending Protection. Your most important perks really are going to be Blessed and Refreshing Move when it comes to a Life Staff, and this is going to stay consistent pretty much everywhere. But this is something that I crafted. It is pretty expensive. It took a lot of attempts to get it, and I don't think it's something that you absolutely have to have, but pretty nice. But again, Blessed, Refreshing Move, and even Refreshing, so just classic Will of the Ancients from Lazarus Instrumentality would be good enough. Looking at the stats and what I use to heal Lazarus, we have 370 Focus, 140 Constitution, kind of a pretty random set of numbers here, you might assume. And that's true. 150 doesn't really make any difference because 10% decrease to critical damage taken. Enemies in PvE can't hit you critically, you know, in the same way that Resilient doesn't work in PvE. This is also like a PvP thing as well, so doesn't really matter as long as you've got at least 100, but I go to 140 just to keep my health pool, you know, at a decent amount here so I don't get one shot, especially if I'm going in with the Void Blade. What you could look to do is drop a little bit off of Focus and take some points into Intelligence to hit a little bit harder with the Void Gauntlet, but yeah, I just like to focus on healing and get in there with the Void Blade, kind of just because it feels cool. Lastly, going into the weapon mastery for Lazarus, and I use this pretty much across the board in all dungeons now, we have Sacred Ground, Orb of Protection, and Beacon. I use the all AoE healing build, and this is typically because my group is usually all melee. It's all great swords and hatchets and spears and great axes, you know, everybody's stacked up in the melee range, including myself, just getting close and whacking the enemy. So fire circles are going to be appearing around their feet, left, right, and center. So what I like to do is just Sacred, Beacon, and Orb all back to back. Sometimes you can open with Orb if you think you can proc the Mending Protection to get the 50% healing increase. It's a good idea to go with Orb first and then do everything else. Probably like Orb, Sacred, and then Beacon. Whatever you do, probably do Beacon last because it can benefit the most from the increased healing effects that you get from Sacred Ground. Increases your healing by 50%, and Orb also can increase your healing by almost 50%. And yeah, after I've got the abilities on cooldown like this, we just switch over to the Void Gauntlet, put the Oblivion down, and just go for it. And I like to throw the Orb out and then detonate on the way back for the heal. And this is pretty much it, you know? This is what we do in Lazarus. It's a very easy dungeon right now. You don't really have to worry too much, so just keep the AoE heals down on the ground and then just go wild with the Void Gauntlet. And that is effectively how I heal Lazarus. Pretty easy peasy. Oh, I realized one thing that I didn't cover as well is the gems in my Life Staff and the gem and the Void Gauntlet. So I'm using, both the gems that I use here are the Arboreal Rally and the Arboreal Rally. It's the Rune Glass gem that gives you extra nature damage. What I found from testing, and I'll show it on the video here if I can, is that the Rune Glass gem doesn't actually reduce the healing. Although it says 12% damage and outgoing healing while at full health, and then a normal diamond, which I don't actually have on me right now. Let me just grab a normal Life Staff with just a standard diamond in here. Like, here's an example. This one says 15% damage and outgoing healing while at full health, and then the Arboreal, so the Rune Glass gem, says 12% damage and outgoing healing. So you would think, oh, 3% healing reduction. Is that really worth it? But it turns out it isn't. Right now, I don't know if it's just a bug or the tooltip isn't accurate or something, but your outgoing healing is not reduced. You can see the numbers here when I put the Rune Glass gem in. It's still the exact same number. So yeah, could be bug fixed at some point, and maybe it's, you know, I don't think it's entirely mandatory that you do this, but I decided to go with the Rune Glass gem that just gives you a little bit more nature damage. So that is called the, hold on, we need to go to weaponsmithing to find it. It is called the Rune Glass of nature, right? Yeah, rune glass case of nature, and I just put a diamond inside of this at the stone cutting table, and then I slap it in the life staff just to do a little bit of extra DPS. Nature damage is usually pretty good, other than when you're in a nature mutation. And like I say, you don't actually lose any healing. You could also go for the leeching gem for some health regen, or you could go for the mana one, the siphoning, or you could go for the one that gives you extra stamina. But for me, I just decided to go for a little bit more DPS. Okay, so moving over to the other mutation that you will find during a Lazarus week, it's going to be mutated barnacles and black powder, and I believe this typically has ice, if I remember rightly. So with that in mind, we have our Lost Ward set, because a lot of the enemies that you face in Barnacles and Black Powder are lost enemies. Now, this is one of the dungeons where there's actually 2 different enemy types. In fact, there's technically 3. You have Lost, Angry Earth, and there's a few beasts as well. I just focus on the Lost Ward, and then I also have some Angry Earth Ward pieces that we put on for the final boss, which we'll showcase in a second. Now, my Lost Ward set is pretty scuffed. It's not ideal, but as you can see here, we've got a refreshing Lost Ward helmet. A lot of my gear actually comes from doing the Siren Trial. So if you guys don't know, if you go to a stone cutting table, you can make a tuning orb similar to the one that we have here. We have a Menicious tuning orb, but I think it's called like the Siren tuning orb or something. Again, at the stone cutting table. If you take them to the Spire of Melpomene, so you have to go like all the way through this elite area, unless you get the fast travel shrine. You'll find the trial up here. You need like 5 players, so it's recommended the F5. I think you can go with 3, and you get a kill it within 15 minutes. If you do kill it, you get a box of loot, and you open it up, and you'll often get items similar to this. They have Lost Ward and Refreshing with a random stat and light, medium, or heavy. But I've done it a few times, and we got some pieces like this, which are pretty good. So those of you looking for Lost Ward, and you don't have any gold for crafting, or you just don't want to do any crafting or buy stuff off of other players, try and check out the Siren Trial. Could be pretty good. But yeah, we got this here, Refreshing and Lost Ward with the focus. I'm using a Malachite gem, which is a little bit weird. It probably should just be an Opal gem, but again, it's giving us mainly elemental and a little bit of physical as well. The chest is Lost Ward and Keen Beacon, so this is something that is kind of unusual. I typically don't go for Keen Beacon, because what I find is you can increase a player's critical chance by 6.1% set. When it heals them, you increase that crit chance. But you can guarantee a crit just by hitting an enemy in the back. So if you have like a melee weapon and then you go up and hit the enemy, so let's say this is the front of the enemy here, if you hit them in the back, it is a guaranteed crit. And this works on pretty much like the vast majority of enemies in the game, other than Scylla and maybe Chardis. And so Lazarus is an example, I guess, where Keen Beacon would be okay. But yeah, as long as the DPS is hitting the enemy in the back, crit chance doesn't really matter at all, because it's a guaranteed crit anyway. But yeah, I've got Keen Beacon here because why not, I guess. I had it, and I think I found it in a storage shed, so I just went with it. No, it wasn't a storage shed, it was crafted. Either way, that's the item that we got there. Lost Ward and Keen Beacon. Don't think it's super necessary. Lost Ward and Fortifying Sacred Ground. And then we have over here, we've got our Refreshing Lost Ward and Putrefying Scream. Now, again, I did say that this armor was a bit of a janky set, and that's because it is a bit of a janky set. So Keen Beacon, not super necessary. Putrefying Scream, I actually don't bother using Scream on the Void Gauntlet most of the time as well, so it doesn't really do anything for us here, but you know, we've got it there. It looks like a fairly good set of pants from, you know, when you look at them, so we just go with it. And then we have Resilient on my legs as well, and I'm not using Divine Embrace, so there is a, you know, effectively these are also just 2 purple items as well. You could ignore it, it's just Lost Ward and Refreshing, and this one is just Lost Ward and Resilient. Actually, this is just 1 perk item. Yeah, my Lost Ward set needs some love, but, you know, it gets the job done. It is going to be ice when it comes to Barnacles and Black Powder currently, so I'm using my Ice Damage Absorption Gem. The ring and the earring are the same as we use in almost all dungeons, so Stonehewn Ring, again, from Starstone Barrows, crafted earring here. We continue to use the same life staff that we showcased during the Lazarus one, so if you missed the explanation to that, you can go in and see it. And again, the gems stay the same in my weapons here. I don't bother changing the gems in the weapon. If you want the explanation for the Rune Glass gem, we talked about it at the end of the Lazarus section, in case you happen to be skipping through the video. The Void Gauntlet that I use here is a Void Gauntlet other than Dark Vengeance. If I'm not using Void Blade, I like to go for this crafted Void Gauntlet instead. It does have some intelligence on it, which isn't the end of the world, but it doesn't help with our healing. It has Blessed, Refreshing Rupture, and Keen. I really like these 3 perks for when it just comes for like raw healing output. Refreshing Rupture is great because typically it is like a 17-second cooldown, but if you land the attack on the enemy, it drops the cooldown drastically, and then every subsequent attack that I land, I just get huge cooldown reduction. One thing that's pretty cool about Keen is it does trigger this Refreshing Precision pretty often. It says 5% cooldown reduction on all abilities on critical hits, so if we can increase our crit chance even more, then we increase our cooldown reduction, and then of course Blast to just do more healing. Mending Protection on the Life Staff, as we previously mentioned, not super necessary. Will of the Ancients could replace this one, but then you do want to make sure that you get Mending Protection on a piece of armor. When it comes to stats, it's fairly similar to what we run in Lazarus. I like to just go for like 140, 130. You could even go down as low as 100, but I just like this number just to be safe. There's no magic, aspect about 140. It just gives me a nice, decent health pool down here, and then the rest into focus just to do some big healing. And of course, we've got a little bit of intelligence here from the Void Gauntlet, but I typically don't like to go in with the Void Blade on Barnacles. I don't know, I just like to sort of stand back and do healing in Barnacles for whatever reason. I don't really like to get stuck in, but you could do it, and if you were going to do that, then you would run Void Blade instead, and maybe look to get something similar to Dark Vengeance. Weapon Mastery for Barnacles and Black Powder stays pretty similar as well. It's just the Orb, Sacred, and Beacon. Again, I just find that we're usually healing in all melee groups, so just dropping big AoE heals on like this seems to help out quite a bit. And then I'll switch over to the Void Gauntlet. I'll drop an Oblivion close to my group if I can. Essence Rupture, and then we'll pop the Orb and just detonate it for the heal on the way back, and then switch over and just keep, spamming. If I run out of mana, I drink a mana potion. If I'm still out of mana, you can also just use the Void Gauntlet's right click and turn health into mana as well. If you guys are ever struggling with the mana problems, remember that you can always just Void Gauntlet right click like this, and big chunks of mana coming back all the time just by doing a cheeky right click every now and again. Weapon Mastery for the Void Gauntlet looks like this. So Essence Rupture, I do find it's fun and necessary to take it like all the way maxed out, because you get the Overflowing Essence, which triggers Blessed, increased healing from the Blessed. Void Collar passive to increase healing from Blessed. And then Orb of Decay actually has some pretty respectable healing as well. It heals for 20% weapon damage per second, which is actually more than Beacon. Beacon is only like 16% weapon damage per second. In fact, it's more than all of these, Sacred Ground is 16% weapon damage per second, but of course it increases healing by 50%, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, there's the Weapon Mastery for Life Staff and Void Gauntlet that I would use in Barnacles. And again, I usually just like to stay at a distance and just, keep the heals flowing into my group. I don't know why. I don't particularly like to go with Void Blade right now, but this is just what I've been enjoying. Now, moving on to the next week of mutations, we have Tempest Heart, typically with Nature, if I remember rightly, and it is the Depths with Fire. Now, this is a good week because both of the dungeons feature Corrupted Ward armor. I do think Corrupted Ward is a set that you want to focus on getting first, because it covers the Depths, it covers Tempest Heart, it covers Dynasty Shipyard, and it also covers parts of Ennead as well. So it is like the most versatile set that covers a lot of different expeditions. But yeah, Corrupted Ward is what we're looking at here, and the set that I use is the Tempestuous Cowl of the Sage, the Tempestuous Handcovers of the Sage, and the Tempestuous Shoes. Now, these actually come from a box of loot that you get from Mara Rosa, who is located sort of up in the top of Murkgard over here. So she's in Murkgard's Cathedral, and she has like 4 or 5 quests that you get. Like, you do one, then you get the other, then you get the other, and they typically just involve you going into Tempest and like killing Isabella. And she gives you boxes of loot, which I strongly encourage you guys to not open until you get to 600 expertise, because you can get these awesome items out of them. It is worth checking. Maybe you guys might have them in a storage shed somewhere, so I can give you an example, because and along with giving you a set of healing armor, so stuff with focus on it, they also give you some dexterity stuff as well. So if I just go to Eastburn and search for Tempest, I think I have some pieces in here. Yeah, the Tempestuous Gloves of the Ranger. Now, the spectral thing changes depending on what gem is in the armor, but these, although they wouldn't look like it, they do actually upgrade to 600 and become legendary. So if we go here and we spend the Umbral Shards, you see now they're legendary, and they've got Corrupted Ward, Elemental Aversion, and Refreshing Evasion. So pretty solid set, and they're available not only for healers, but there's an intelligence version, dexterity version, and strength version. So strongly encourage you guys to go do that quest chain. I'll leave some info in the description down below on New World databases to, so you can go check the quest chain out and stuff. But yeah, great stuff. So again, these come from the boxes and some solid perks on here. The chest piece that I'm rocking has Corrupted Ward, Physical Aversion, Refreshing Evasion. This comes from Mutated Dynasty Shipyard. Physical Aversion, I guess, can be handy against some archers and muskets and stuff like that. You'll very frequently pull aggro of those, so not necessarily a bad perk to have. And then the legs, as we talked about, during the topic of Lazarus, these just stay consistent throughout a lot of different dungeons because the perks are just solid for like so many different situations. Because it is a nature mutation, I rock my custom nature amulet here. At this point, I don't know if I've covered it, but this was just an amulet I crafted myself using a golden scarab, but you could pick up something like this from the trading post, or you could even try and find like an old amulet, and then you can put the gem into it from there as well. The ring and the earring are going to stay consistent as they do pretty much across the board. From Starstone Barrows, we have the stone hewn ring, and then we get a crafted earring here. Again, healthy toast, refreshing toast, just great. And like we saw with Barnacles and Black Powder, my Void Gauntlet and my Life Staff stay consistent throughout Tempest Heart. I don't think there's any point where I really change my build. And moving into the stats, we have the same setup as we do in all the other dungeons that we currently showcased. 140 Constitution, 360 Focus. The 140 Con, nothing special about this. The 150 doesn't matter because it's only for PvP, but 100 is what I would recommend minimum. And then the reason why we go above 300, as with other dungeons, just to get a little bit extra healing. We have some points in Intelligence, which is coming from our Void Gauntlet, which is staying the same as it has in previous mutations, and so does the Life Staff as well. I feel like this point, you know, just re-explaining why we use this Life Staff and this Void Gauntlet and the particular Rune Glass gems is going to become redundant, so if you watch the Lazarus section, again, we do cover it there, and the Weapon Mastery is going to stay relatively the same with an all AoE healing setup. What you might find when it comes to a Kiki, which is the first big Spriggan boy, you might want to change over to Divine Embrace and drop Beacon. I do find that my DPS, my players get a bit spread out. Usually one player is taking way more damage than the others, so swapping Beacon to Divine Embrace might help you against the big Spriggan, but everything else is going to stay the same here. I don't like to go Void Blade on Tempest currently because I feel like the nature mutation punishes you pretty badly. When the swirly, like, gloopy pool comes out, it goes to the most distant player, which is going to be you as a healer, provided your group is all melee. So if you're in melee as well, the little nature puddle is going to be on top of everybody, and it just does tons of damage. So yeah, I was trying to stay out of range with Void Gauntlet and instead just doing damage from a distance with, you know, with the Life Staff and the Void Gauntlet this way. Right, moving over to Mutated the Depths. Now, I do think Mutated Depths is actually more difficult than Mutated Tempest Heart, which is interesting because Nishaten and Isabella, a lot of people usually struggle with that, but yeah, the Depths, I think, is like a whole other level of like spookiness because the fire on the ground, and then sometimes you get silent circles, and it's very claustrophobic. There's a lot of enemies in there, so although my armor is going to stay pretty much the same as we have in Tempest Heart, and one thing that I maybe didn't address in Tempest Heart is the Malachite gems. Again, these could be Opal gems, but just, you know, Malachite and Opal I think can be interchangeable because you are still going to take some physical damage from time to time. You know, only 50% of the damage is converted to fire with the relevant enemies that have that. So yeah, Malachite, not the end of the world, but obviously one big change from the Depths to Tempest Heart, or vice versa, is changing the nature damage absorption over to fire damage absorption with the amulet. There is a lot of fire damage coming out in the Depths, and indeed the final boss, Thorpe, I believe he does a lot of fire damage as well. You typically don't want to be standing near him, but sometimes it is kind of unavoidable to hit the fire on the ground. Now, everything does stay pretty much the same in terms of stats and weapon mastery as it was in the Depths. Still using the Void Gauntlet here. Sometimes you could go with Void Blade in the Depths. I don't think it's the worst idea because you can all stack up and just be inside the heal. So if you're feeling a little bit more brave, you can switch out the Essence Rupture to the Void Blade. And then obviously getting a relevant Void Gauntlet that would benefit from that. Maybe something with Voracious Blade could be a good idea in the Depths, just because there is a lot of consistent damage coming out that you could just heal through. But what I find when it comes to the first boss, the Archdeacon Azamela, whatever he's called, the guy that summons the dogs, I actually like to switch over to Splash of Light here. So I typically run something a little bit like this instead of running Beacon. And the reason why we do this is because of, actually, let's swap that for that one. There we go. The reason why I do this setup is because I find that my DPS gets very spread out on different sides of the room. You know, when you're closing the portals, he's waving his staff in the air, he's detonating the mines, it's exploding, it's hitting everybody unless they dodge, but you know, sometimes you can't trust your DPS to do that. So Splash of Light, being able to hit everybody simultaneously at the same time is pretty fantastic. One thing that I would do that would benefit this build, especially after the next update that comes out with leaderboards, is I would pick up a life staff called Spirit Pool. I currently don't have it, but Spirit Pool is a life staff with Blessed, Refreshing Move, and the third perk is called Purity of Light, which gives you an extra heal on top of your normal Splash of Light. So that could be pretty beneficial for that build there. And then after we go past Archdeacon Azamela, I actually change it over to this build here, interestingly enough. So I changed my build like 3 different times in the Depths, and this is the build that I find works the best for facing off against Captain Thorpe. Captain Thorpe, I find, hits my tank very, very hard, and sometimes he occasionally clips one of the DPS players as well, and they pretty much lose all of their health. So it is generally very high damage on a single target, and that's why I find having a single target heal actually helps better than having Beacon here, because Beacon just doesn't heal people up fast enough, and Thorpe will cut them down really fast. So yeah, Sacred Ground on the tank, Orb into the pack of everybody, and then Divine Embrace on whoever needs it. And as a result of that, when we go into that fight, I do actually change my life staff over to the Glowing Life Crystal staff, which comes from Mutated Dynasty Shipyard. So I do make a few interesting changes in the depths, and I find they help out a lot. So yeah, full AoE healing up until the first boss. Then I changed to Splash of Light, dropping Beacon for Splash of Light, and then after that we drop Splash of Light for Divine Embrace instead, and we continue to the end of the dungeon like that. So that's currently how I'm doing the depths, and it does work for me a good chunk of the time. Now moving on to the next set of mutations, so I guess we could call this week 3, week 4, I don't know where we're at, but it will be Dynasty Shipyard. Currently it's Void on the particular cycle that we have, and we have Garden of Genesis with Nature. So we'll move to Dynasty Shipyard first, because we've just gone from Tempest Heart and the Depths. Both of those use Corrupted Ward, and you know, it's the same with Dynasty Shipyard as well. We got Corrupted Ward, Refreshing Evasion, Elemental Aversion. If you guys missed it, at the beginning of the Tempest Heart Explainer, we talk about how you can get this tempestuous stuff. It is really good, so I encourage you to go check the Tempest Heart section of gear about how to acquire this. But we also use a chest piece that we got from Mutated Dynasty Shipyard, funny enough. The gloves here, again, coming from the Tempestuous set. The Shadewalker Leggings of the Sage are a crafted set that, again, we use across pretty much all dungeons. It's very rare that these change out. And we've also got the Tempestuous Shoes over here. The Amulet, because it is a Void mutation, as far as I can remember in Dynasty, is going to be the Void Damage Absorption. Stonehewn Ring, as per usual with all dungeons, and also this crafted earring here. The life staff stays the same with Blessed, Refreshing Move, Mending Protection, but again, this could just be Will of the Ancients, but you will need to find Mending Protection on a piece of armor somewhere else. And we have Keen, Blessed, and Refreshing Rupture on the Void Gauntlet, as we, again, use in other dungeons as well. Now, looking at the weapon mastery, it would typically look something like this. Again, it's just the all AoE healing build, assuming that when this video comes out, we're still in a melee meta, so you're just, healing great axes, warhammers, sword and shield, greatsword, hatchet, lots and lots of hatchets, some spears. Everybody's using melee weapons these days, so just having all of your melee clumped up, just drop the heals on them like this. However, one thing that you might look to do is drop Beacon and instead take Divine Embrace, and then subsequently pick up the ultimate over here as a result. I sometimes use this for the dogs or the cats. When you fight Isabella and then she goes away and she releases the big dudes out of the cages, having a single target heal can be pretty nice here. Sometimes as well, you might want to change your Void Gauntlet out for a Rapier. The reason why we go Rapier is just to run away and stay alive, because you might find pretty often that when you heal somebody, the cats will get aggroed onto you, or at least one of the cats, and just using the Rapier to like duck, dodge, and dive and panic and try and stay alive, and then dodge and drink potions and dodge, and just hopefully you don't die. You got to be careful if you do have aggro of the cats. Try and not drag it through your DPS, because it will do this leaping attack and just like one-shot everybody. It can be pretty stressful, but just fingers crossed, hold on to your butts and try not to panic. When it comes to aggro and you are having troubles with this, and I guess this actually also goes for the depths as well, you could use an earring that has evasive on it. So this is sometimes something I switch out for. Not entirely sure if it actually works. I'm really not sure if this perk is working as intended, but it makes it feel like it does. Maybe it's just placebo. But the evasive perk here, reduce the generation of threat by 50% for 5 seconds after performing a dodge. If it does work, then in theory it would help, the dogs stay on the DPS, and then you can just heal them, and rather than getting everything running at you, yeah, it's a little bit more calm and you can just focus on healing. So maybe if you are having trouble and getting the attention of lots of enemies, you could look to run an earring like this. Other than that though, we're going to go with the standard healing setup with the Void Gauntlet. Again, I'm using a Void Gauntlet with Blessed, Keen, and Refreshing Rupture. The Void Gauntlet has Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Mending Protection. Blessed and Refreshing Move being the most important perks just across the board in all dungeons, just to lower that cooldown. Mending Protection can be nice, but it could just be Will of the Ancients with refreshing here and just get mending protection on a piece of armor. And stats wise in Dynasty Shipyard, it's going to remain the same as well. Not sure if I already covered this, but yeah, we just, again, staying in that sort of like nice safe range. We don't need to be 150, it doesn't really matter. 200 is feeling like a little bit overkill these days, especially as like you see DPS players running less and less Constitution. This 5 con meta is becoming a thing, so you need to be able to pump out some pretty big healing. 360 focus allows you to achieve that. The other mutation we will see during this week is Garden of Genesis, and typically Garden of Genesis has nature. So as a result of going into Garden of Genesis, the majority of the enemies in there, in fact all of the enemies, are Angry Earth, so having Angry Earth Ward is something that's going to be necessary. So we have a crafted helmet here with Angry Earth Ward and Nullifying Oblivion. Now this is actually the first time that we make use of this perk. In most other dungeons it's not really relevant, it is more of a PvP thing, but the soldiers in Garden of Genesis, the guys with the big like two-handed mace, they apply a fortify to themselves. So you'll see like a shield icon with like up arrows above it. It's a pretty hefty damage reduction, so if you go up to them and drop the Oblivion, you can actually strip away that buff, because as it says, upon activation, Oblivion removes limited duration buffs from enemies within its radius. So actually gets a lot of value here against the soldiers, but then as soon as you do that, make sure you get away, because man, they do a lot of AoE damage and it hits really hard even with a full set of Angry Earth Ward gear. The chest piece that we're wearing here is the Spriggan Bane piece, so we had a crafted helmet. This actually drops from, in the same way that you can get the Lost Ward armor that we talked about, you can also get some Angry Earth gear by doing the Spriggan trial, so it's called Zygromat's Grove or something like that. Zygromat's, I don't know how you actually say it, but you can craft tuning orbs for Zygromat in the stone cutting bench, so they're called the Monacious Tuning Orb. You bring them up to there, and if you have a group of 5, or well 3 minimum but 5 recommended, you can get boxes of loot from that, which give you Spriggan Bane gear, and some of them have Angry Earth Ward. Well, most of them have Angry Earth Ward gear, and if you can get lucky, you can also get some with Focus or Constitution, and Refreshing is typically on there as well. So yeah, some Spriggan Bane gear here. We're using a light chest. This is actually an interesting setup because we use the Siren's Thigh Guards. These drop from mutated, or it might even be normal. I can't remember if it's mutated or normal, Barnacles and Black Powder. And they've got some great perks. Angry Earth Ward, Refreshing, and Elemental Aversion with Constitution. You know, it's a nice, well-rounded piece. But because these are medium legs, the full set is medium as well. What you want to do is do medium legs and then a medium helmet. Now, I could also do the medium chest and everything else light, but it just so happens that the way things played out is I was able to get a set that functioned this way. So you don't need to do medium legs and medium gloves, but that is what I do. You could do medium chest and everything else light, or you could do medium legs, medium boots, medium legs, medium helmet. But yeah, this is just, you know, the way things panned out for me. So we have medium gloves here with Refreshing Ward, Fortifying Sacred Ground, and Angry Earth Ward. Of course, because these are the medium legs, we're actually not using our, you know, well-used pants for once that have the Fortifying Sacred Ground. Instead, we get them on the gloves. And then our boots here just have Angry Earth Ward, Refreshing Evasion. So yeah, again, not my best set, a bit like the Lost Ward set. It's a little bit scuffed, but it does the job. Amulet-wise, because it is nature, of course, we've got the nature damage absorption with the nature gem, stone hewn ring, consistent across the board, crafted earring, consistent across the board, same life staff that we use in pretty much all of our mutations, and the same void gauntlet as well. So you can go back and check out some, you know, I think we even talked about this in the Lazarus explanation as to why we use these particular rune glass gems and stuff like that. So if you missed it, if you're skipping ahead, in the Lazarus explainer, we have, you know, a description of what's going on there. Stats wise, it is going to stay fairly consistent to what we have. It's 141 here rather than 140, and that's just because my gear has a little bit more constitution on it than normal. 359 focus. Again, the reason for this is just get some big healing. I find my DPS is often a lot squishier these days because everybody wants to run as little constitution as possible. They just want to go fast, fast, fast. So keeping them alive with a high amount of focus does help, but some constitution so I don't die myself. Weapon mastery, all AoE healing. Again, because of the hatchet meta, everybody just stacking up together in a big group. All AoE healing works great. And then the Void Gauntlet. We're not using Void Blade really ever in Genesis these days because the soldiers just hit so hard, and also because it's a nature mutation, you don't want to be dragging that nature puddle into melee range. You want to keep it at ranged, so healing from range with your ranged abilities, applying Refreshing Rupture on bosses, nullifying Oblivion to strip away buffs, and Orb of Decay just rolling through people. And yeah, keep AoE heals down, and that's pretty much it for Genesis. And for the final set of mutations, week 4 or whatever, the last week of the month, which is what we're currently on now. Well, actually, it's the beginning of February, but whatever. We have the Ennead with Ice, and then we'll have Starstone Barrows with Void. Again, if this changes, you can kind of like view it the same. The main thing that would change would be the amulet if you're using the same setup as me. Otherwise, you're just going to need to change the gems from, like, if this was fire instead, you need to change them from amethyst to ruby if you are changing gems in your armor. But yeah, let's start off with the Ennead up here. This is one of the most stressful dungeons for me to heal, especially with this fiendish thing right now. It does scare me a lot. But Ennead is a 2-part dungeon, just like with Barnacles and Black Powder. So you'll start off with your Ancient Ward set. We've already gone over this with Lazarus, so I'm not going to spend too much time. It is the same armor that it would use in Lazarus, but we changed the amulet to give us ice damage absorption. Stone Hewn Ring, Crafted Earring as always. I am using still the all AoE healing build in the majority of Ennead, but I do change things up as well. So I don't go in with Void Blade because I just find I need to stay on the healing trigger all the time when it comes to Ennead. But Mastery for the Void Gauntlet is going to look like this the whole time. Typically, we're never really going Void Blade because I just find it's too spooky. I just get a Life Staff heal all the time, constantly landing left clicks to activate Revitalize and also the Refreshing Move on the Life Staff. The stats also staying the same as they do pretty much consistently across the board. I just, this is the good balance of like pumping out some good heals, but also not being too squishy that you die in one hit. Even with the ward gear, I still find this is just a nice safe ground for me. But as we mentioned, when it comes to the mastery on the skill tree, I like to change a few times around here. So sometimes what I find is like when it comes to the boss fights with the Beetle and also with the Crassus, the Corrupted Legionnaire guy, my DPS gets a bit spread out. So sometimes having all AoE healing doesn't really work out. So what you could do instead is just take the Sacred Ground, Orb of Protection, and then Divine Embrace, or potentially, and I do like to do this in the final fight, so when we're going into the boss fight, you can forego Mending Protection and go Splash of Light like this, or you could forego Divine Embrace and go like this instead. So some combination of these heals is what I would recommend. I do like running Splash of Light a lot in the final boss fight because there's a lot of AoE damage coming out in the pillars phase where it requires everybody to go up to a subsequent pillar and hold down the interact button to turn off the big pulsing wave of damage that comes out. Again, your DPS can dodge it, but don't trust them to do that. You're probably going to have to heal. Splash of Light just comes in pretty clutch because it can heal everybody within a 100-meter radius, which is huge. That's so far away. You can heal somebody like who's in that ship over there, basically. That's only 80 meters away. But no other heal is going to reach that far. So yeah, Splash of Light, pretty clutch for the big AoE healing in the final boss fight. And then against Crassus, which is the second boss fight, sometimes taking a single target heal like this can be pretty beneficial because you'll find that there's one DPS who just consistently gets hit with the red soldiers mechanic that he likes to spam out. So yeah, all AoE healing up until Crassus, like so. What am I missing here? You need to get that, or you could sometimes take this as well. And then after Crassus, you probably want to switch over to Splash of Light, and you can do it like this. And if you still find like there's, one person's taking too much damage, you could even drop just do Sacred Ground in the tank and then use these heals for the rest of your DPS. And obviously, whenever you're using Divine Embrace in a build, try and go for the Glowing Life Crystal Staff instead, which you get from Mutated Dynasty Shipyard, because this just gives you such a huge healing cooldown reduction if you can land it on somebody who's under 50%. So yeah, whenever you're using Divine Embrace on your build, strongly encourage the Glowing Life Crystal Staff. But there is also going to be a strong consideration that when we go Splash of Light, to take Spirit Pool, which you can get from Mutated Barnacles and Black Powder. In fact, it might even be normal Barnacles and Black Powder, but yeah, Spirit Pool is a good recommendation as well. Blast, Refreshing Move, and Purity of Light. Quickly want to mention as well, like I say, when you get past the first boss, the Beetle boss, you are going to need to switch over to your Corrupted Ward set. So finding all of the Corrupted Ward, which is always like super fun for me. I'm just like, looking through and trying to click on them one by one. We keep the legs the same, but everything else is going to change over to that Tempestuous set, which again, we talked about in earlier explanations. We talked about it for Tempest Heart. I think that was the first corrupted dungeon that came up in the rotation. But yeah, changing things from my Ancient Ward set to Corrupted Ward. It keeps the stats are the same. That's one thing that I would try and encourage you guys to do. It does help you out a bit. If you can keep the stats the same, it means you don't have to respec halfway through the dungeon as well. So focus on your Corrupted Ward boots or Constitution, but then consequently, if you have Constitution on your Corrupted Ward boots, try and keep Constitution on your Ancient Ward boots as well, if that makes sense. Or you got to balance it out where you have Focus here and then Constitution here and then the other way around. So these would be Constitution and the other ones would be focus, if that makes sense. I don't know, maybe I'm just confusing you guys at this point, but try and keep your stats the same on your armor is what I'm saying, so that the swap isn't as painful and you don't have to go in and like do your attributes again as well. The last mutated dungeon and my last gear set to talk about is my Starstone Barrows healing set. Now this is currently void, and probably when it comes into rotation next time it's also going to be void as well. It's going to be like another month from when this video comes out, but assuming Amazon don't change anything, it seems to maintain the same elements. So we have, of course, Ancient Ward, because a good chunk of Starstone Barrows is Ancient Ward, but then we have the Void Damage Absorption Amulet, because it is Void. Stone Hewn Ring stays the same, Earring stays the same across the board, and again, we continue to use all AoE healing because of the Hatchet meta. I find, you know, everybody stacked on top of each other, so just again, dropping big AoE heals, so the build looks very, very similar, well, not very similar, identical to how a lot of other builds use, and I don't change the build at any point during Starstone Barrows currently. I just keep it all AoE throughout. Same with the Void Gauntlet as well. I don't think going in with the Void Blade currently makes much sense because it is, you know, Void damage is heavily reduced. So the Void Blade's basically not going to do anything. So just standing at a distance, dropping some Oblivions on your team when you can, Orb of Decay through the enemies, detonate on the way back for the big heal. So if you guys don't know, you can hit E again and explode it, and then Essence Rupture on whatever target you can find just to give your team a little bit more lifesteal. Halfway through the dungeon, so after you kill, well, when does it happen? Yeah, there's going to be a point in the dungeon where you go across a pillar and then Simon Gray is like a big brutey guy, he's standing there. That's when you switch to your Lost Ward set. If you've never healed this dungeon before, it is recommended that you go to Ancient Ward and then you switch over to Lost Ward. So we'll put the same Lost Ward set on that we featured in Barnacles and Black Powder. It's not great, but it does the job. Unfortunately, my stats don't line up on my Lost Ward set, so I do have to redo my stats here. And then there gets to another point in the dungeon where you fight against like a ghost, a brute, and a bat or something like that, and you go up this ramp and then you'll see a bunch of skeletons like sort of chilling on the other side. And usually you'll see everybody else, like if you're a bit nervous, you'll see everybody else kind of just stand still, and that's the point where you change back to your Ancient Ward gear to what we had there. But I don't really change anything else. Just the ward armor, my abilities and stuff don't change, it all stays the same. And that pretty much covers it. That is all of our different ward and pieces of gear that we use for healing various dungeons. One thing that I will add on to the end of this video, because we didn't cover it specifically at any point, is your Heart Gem or your Heart Rune. I typically am using the Stalwart Heart Rune of Stone form. I just like this a lot. It keeps me very safe. If I get aggro, I can pop it. I get damage reduction. The heal is actually very significant, especially when you stand in your Sacred Ground. It's like a regen potion, but on steroids. So really like my Stone Form rune. You can get the blue version of this, so the basic version from Chartis at the end of Lazarus, just normal Lazarus, and then you can upgrade it at the Stone Cutting Bench to Epic, and then you can upgrade it again, and when you upgrade it to Legendary, I recommend that you choose the Stalwart version. Sometimes I also use Grasping Vines as well if I'm feeling pretty confident, especially if I'm playing with the Void Blade, so maybe like in Lazarus, I like to go for Grasping Vines. You get the normal version of this from Genesis, and then again, take it to the Stone Cutting Bench. Make sure, by the way, some people say like, Baggins, I can't see the option to upgrade it in the Stone Cutting Bench. It's because you got to take it off and put it into your inventory. And then when you go to the Stone Cutting Bench, which I think we're pretty close to one, right? Yeah, it's down there. You can then upgrade it to Epic and subsequently Legendary. And I recommend the Brutal version for the Rend and the Weaken. One other thing I would also encourage you guys is to have Gemstone Dust, the strong version, or even higher. Gives you elemental damage absorption by 25%, so you take 25% less damage from elemental damage, which includes fire, frost, nature, void, for 20 seconds or until damage is received 12 times. Can be pretty handy if you are just really struggling to get out of a particular mechanic, like on the nature week, if that nature puddle is coming towards you and you just can't get away from it, you could pop Gemstone Dust. It'll reduce how much damage it does to you. Can be a lifesaver. And then I just like to go for Health Potion, Mana Potion, and Regen Potion to stay alive. Coatings, I don't often use them unless I think my DPS is really struggling. We need to push everything to the max, like maybe in Ennead I would use them. Coatings, you know, probably apply it to the life staff unless you're going in with a Void Blade. Honing Stone you can also use as well, but it doesn't actually increase your healing. This is a common question that comes up, but Honing Stones don't increase healing. I often have a Hearty Meal going for the Energizing Hearty Meal for the mana regen. Not sure if it really helps that much, but I like to pop that. And sometimes I also use Desert Sunrise as well. I use this in Ennead and sometimes in Starstone because I just find those pretty stressful to heal right now, but most of the dungeons we don't bother with them. And of course, stat food. One thing that we didn't mention and we didn't cover is in order to get get to this breakdown of stats, which is currently off right now, I use food that increases my focus by 24 and constitution by 16. This is the cheapest one right now on the Barry trading post. Slow roasted bear flank with root vegetables. There is another version of this where it increases your constitution by 24 and your focus by 16. But I would recommend this over the straight stat food, which is like 40 constitution or 40 focus, because those are like 3-4 times the price. So yeah, getting the one that's like split between focus and con, that's what I like a lot. I don't know if there's anything else to mention at this point, but I feel like the video is going for pretty damn long, so I am going to wrap this one up here. If I did forget anything, let me know in the comments down below, or just pop in onto Twitch. We're live almost every day, so if you come in, leave a question in chat. I try my best to answer as many questions as I can every day when we're streaming. And of course, if you guys enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like. It does let me know that, you know, it's useful to you guys and we can do more of this stuff. And if you want to see future updated build guides and videos like this, especially with the meta, it's probably going to be changing soon because Amazon's doing a lot of buffs and nerfs to various weapons. If you want to see an updated version of this guide or anything else, consider clicking subscribe. But that's all for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you all in the next one.